This is a map of British Columbia. Here's Vancouver. There were 6 locations in interior BC to which over half of all people of Japanese ancestry living on the West Coast were required to relocate in 1942. Those locations became known collectively as the ghost towns. This is the town of Hope. Tashme was located here, 14 miles east of Hope, just outside the 100-mile protected area. Moving east, here's Greenwood, where 1,200 evacuees ended up. Still further east, in the Kootenay Valley, Slocan, comprised of Slocan City, Farm and Popoff, several miles south, and Lemon Creek, 7 miles south of Slocan City. To the north on Slocan Lake, New Denver, and Rosebery, 4 miles north, Sandon, 8 miles east of New Denver by road, and Caslow on Kootenay Lake. Tashme was built on Trite's Ranch, which initially had 2 large dairy barns, a horse barn, 6 log cabins, a piggery, blacksmith shop, farm equipment storage, and several other buildings. About 2,640 Japanese Canadians were relocated here and lived in hastily constructed tar paper covered houses and large barns which had been converted to living space, community hall, and classrooms. This is a general view of Tashme, entry road into Tashme. The large barn, identified by the silo near the middle, was known as the building. It had a community hall and classrooms on the 2nd floor. The second large barn, designated the C building, had 38 apartments. There is the fire tower and hall, powerhouse, and the large woodsheds, the mess hall, the BC Security Commission office, general store, the miso factory at the far left, and the approximately 350 houses that were put up to accommodate the Japanese, generally 2 families per house, 1 family in each of the 2 side rooms, a common room in between with a wood stove for cooking and heating. There was a logging operation about a mile away. Residence for the non-Japanese staff. The Tashme Hospital. A truck loaded with logs can be seen coming down the road. Mr. Hatashita, Mr. Masuda, Mr. and Mrs. Hamagaki, Mr. Yasutaro Yamaga. These are high school students coming out of the classrooms in D building. Some of the students are Fumi Sasaki, Arnie Arai, Tats Hori, Shiz Tanoue, Mio Arai, Setsu Kawabe, Miyako Omotani, Hideko Matsui, Amy Yanagawa. There's Miss Catherine Greenbank, the principal, Miss Winifred McBride. Other students are Midori Sato, Mitsuko Nishimura, Ben Sakamoto, Willie Takahashi, Jesse Nishihata, Tommy Hayakawa, Mitsu Tanoue, Bob Wakabayashi, Dave Mizumi. Miss May McLaughlin, Tashme High School's first principal. The government provided only for elementary grades 1 to 8 schooling. The churches therefore assumed responsibility for high school education and kindergarten. Here in Tashme, for example, The United Church staffed and funded the high school, while the Anglican Church ran the kindergarten. The log cabin where Reverend McWilliam and high school teacher Ernie Bist lived. The United Church Issei congregation. That's Mrs. Higa waving. Some of the others are Mrs. Umetsu, Mrs. Hori, Mr. Hamagaki, Mr. and Mrs. Endo, Mrs. Uno, Mrs. Morita, Mr. and Mrs. Hatashita, Mr. Masuda. Miss Yuki Arai at far right with her grade 8 senior class. The kindergarten children. Miss May Walker and Miss Rinko Kojima. Kids swinging on the boulevard. Shinwakai, or the Japanese Committee Office. Newsletters and notices of community events were issued from here. View of Tashme houses. It's one of the 10 avenues. The Fire Bell Tower. Children playing in a typical alley between rows of houses. The Miso Factory. Mr. Soichiro Shimizu at right, Mr. Negoro at center, and an unknown third man were the miso makers. Mrs. Arai and Yuki Arai in front of their house. General view of Tashme. This building, called the D building, used to be one of the 2 large dairy barns. Part of the basement was used for high school home economics and science lab. The commissioned carpenter workshop was on the ground floor, and the second floor had classrooms and a community hall where activities such as concerts, funerals, dances, community suppers, Sunday school, and movies were held. Across the street was the A building, a former sheep barn. Classrooms were built here for primary grades of elementary school and for high school, and part of the building was used to house older single men. What had been the second large dairy barn, designated the C building, had approximately 38 single-room apartments. The horse stable. The piggeries. The log cabins were further to the left, and the road led to the exit from Tashme and towards the town of Hope. Over here was a U-shaped building and the mess hall. This is the C building. Across the street was a U-shaped building which had the general store here, the BC Security Commission office here, and a warehouse. Adjacent to it was the mess hall. These are the houses built for the Japanese. There were 3 or 4 bathhouses along the far end of the row of houses, and beyond that were the vegetable gardens. A grade 7 class, George Sasaki, Richard Masuda, and Kaz Fukumoto are among the students here. Mrs. Min Sakamoto's grade 8 senior home economics class. Mrs. Sakamoto is standing at the far right. Students in the front row are from left to right, Hideko Matsui, Setsu Kawabe, Ayako Ida, and Kim Nishimura. Ernie Best's high school class. Zooming in a bit, here's the teacher, Ernie Best. Some of the students are Akiko Okawara, Yutaka Hatanaka, Isamu Watanabe, Miyoko Arai, George Sasaki, Shiz Tanoue, Hideko Kawasaki. Miss Winifred McBride, one of the high school teachers, a UBC graduate in agriculture. May Day Parade. The May Queen and her attendants. The scout is Noble Hori. The Tashme welfare staff in 1944, from left to right, Roy Shin, Mie Okamura, Lily Sakamoto, Amy Okawara, not identified, Shig Yoshida. The Tashme CGIT leader is Yuki Arai, standing at the far right. To the east of Tashme, from his mission base in Grand Forks, Reverend Ogura served Grand Forks, Greenwood, Midway, Cascade, and Alpine. Miss Madeline Bach was assigned to Greenwood by the United Church WMS. Here are Madeline Bach, Reverend and Mrs. Ogura at the Grand Forks train station. Slocan City boomed in 1897 as a distribution point for the silver, lead, zinc mining interests in the region. By 1905, it was incorporated as a city, with 637 miners and 200 prospectors among its residents. With the closing of the Ontario Slocan Lumber Company and the Arlington Mine in 1906, Slocan became a ghost town. It had a population of only 177 in 1941. During the war, approximately 4,800 Japanese Canadians were relocated to Slocan, comprised of Slocan City, Bay Farm, Popoff, and Lemon Creek. The lookout point south of Silverton, Reverend Shimizu, Mrs. Oi, and Mr. Sunohara. This is part of the Slocan-New Denver Road. Tunnel near Slocan City. Slocan Lake. This is a view of Slocan City. Houses built to accommodate the Japanese in Lemon Creek. The following segment was all filmed in Lemon Creek. Lemon Creek Public School. Lemon Creek Houses. Mrs. Oi drawing water from an outdoor tap. Everyone grew vegetables in the garden. Mr. and Mrs. Komiyama, Reverend Komiyama, and Mrs. Oi, all of Lemon Creek, and Tom Shoyama, visiting from Kaslo. August 1944. This is the Ikeno family. Reverend Komiyama and some kids rafting on Slocan Lake. The Lemon Creek Kindergarten. The teacher is Miss Helen Hurd. A mother's meeting. That's Helen Hurd. Lemon Creek High School. Among the students here are Tony Tateishi, Bing Tokiwa, Aki Matsubayashi, Nikki Tanabe, Tom and Tad Oyagi. Reverend Komiyama and Miss Gertrude Hamilton, the principal. Lemon Creek Houses. Furoya, the bathhouse. Otera, the Buddhist church. General view of the Lemon Creek houses in which the Japanese lived. A mother's meeting. This is likely Lemon Creek, but could perhaps be Bay Farm or Popoff. The leader is Helen Hurd. Early arrivals to Slocan Valley in 1942 lived in tents until the houses were built. This is very likely Popoff. Mrs. Suzuki at lift and Hide Hyodo visiting from New Denver in front of the Suzuki house in Slocan City. Mrs. Suzuki at right with Mary Yamaoka and Ricky. Reverend Tak Komiyama, Mr. and Mrs. Komiyama, in front of their Lemon Creek house. Majorette's March at Lemon Creek's May Day. Lemon Creek May Queen. The May Queen and attendants. Bay Farm and Popoff school teachers. The teachers here include Reverend Tsuji, Heidi Yamashita, Katie Oyama, Masuko Iguchi, Kaz Hamazaki, Fred Yano, Yoshiko Yoshida, Hideo Iguchi, Mary Asazuma. The Pinecrest Public School in Bay Farm. View of houses in Popoff. View of Bay Farm. View of Slocan City. The Japanese evacuees to Slocan City were accommodated in existing vacant houses. New Denver was initially called El Dorado by those who first camped on the site through the winter of 1891. It became the government center for the Slocan area, which was enjoying a mining boom in the late 1800s. At its height, it had a population of about 450. The town declined following closure of mines after World War I. However, agriculture, logging, tourism, and small-scale mining continued, and in 1939 the population stood at 350. About 1,100 Japanese Canadians were relocated from the west coast to New Denver, and 500 to neighboring Rosebery, which only had 30 residents prior to the arrival of the evacuees. This is a section of the Slocan-New Denver Road. There were some scary spots along here. View of New Denver from the Rosebery direction. New Denver's local public school. Downtown New Denver. Slocan Lake. The New Market Hotel. Patry and Greer Dry Goods Store. This is the business section of New Denver. The BC Provincial Police Building. The Anglican Church and Reverend Kosaburo, its minister. The New Denver Hospital. The sanitarium, which was built to care for Japanese TB patients. View of houses in the orchard. The sanitarium. Flower garden in front of the sand. The sanitarium in color. The United Church Issei Congregation. Some of the members recognized are Haruko Takahashi, Mrs. Takahashi, Mrs. Kodama. There's Mr. Sakamoto, who operated the BC Rooms on Jackson Avenue in Vancouver. Fumi Toyama, Shig Okumura, Mr. and Mrs. Toyama. The WA, or Women's Group of the Church. Mrs. Sakamoto at the very left end. The kindergarten. In New Denver, local non-Japanese children regularly attended kindergarten with the Japanese children. Kindergarten Children's Mothers Group. New Denver Orchard Public School. The Second National Japanese United Church Conference of Ministers and Lay Delegates, held at the Turner Memorial United Church. Nita Sadler, Mae McLaughlin, Madeline Bach, Helen Hurd, Reverend Bunt of the Home Mission Board, Terry Hidaka and Mae McLaughlin, Dr. Shimota Kahara of Kaslo, Reverend Ogura, Reverend Akagawa, Reverend Komiyama, Reverend McWilliam, Reverend Kabayama, Reverend Yoshioka. Young People's Group led by Miss Ira Lydiard. Wedding of Fumi Toyama and Sheg Okumura at the Turner Memorial United Church. Likely Silver Creek that separated the orchard from downtown New Denver. Teachers from all the ghost towns at the Second Teachers Training School held in New Denver, summer of 1944. Hide Hyodo, supervisor of the ghost town public schools. Mrs. Booth and Mr. Boys. Terry Hidaka, assistant supervisor, speaking with Miss Manning. Mr. Lougheed, supervisor of relocation camps, with Miss Campbell and Mie Okumura. Instructions were provided by staff members of the Vancouver Normal School. Teacher's choir with leader Rosa Baba. The pianist is Aya Tokunaga. Principal Lord addressing the teachers during spring opening ceremonies, July 23, 1944. The approximately 130 Niseis who served as teachers in the ghost town schools were mostly young high school graduates. Teachers participating in a rhythmic dance routine. The choir leader here is Miss Velma Campbell. Velma Campbell. Primary Teachers Circus Parade on the closing day of the summer school, August 17, 1944. Mie Ueda at the lead, Yoshiko Kurita, Martha Yamazaki, Mina Arikado, Naka Suzuki, Tosh Maeda, Kyoko Imai, Fumi Ueda, and others. School Road in New Denver. Aiko Murakami's Home Economics class. Students include Tamiko Nakamura and Seidi Kitagawa. Aiko Murakami's sewing class. New Denver Orchard Public School. High school students identified are Harumi Matsushita, Katie Nishino, Joan Toyama, Chieko Wakayama, Sandy Kaji, Dot Matsumoto, Bob Takagi, Larry Murai, George Masuda, Roy Shintani, Fred Kamibayashi. Teachers are Helen Lawson and Marge Rempo. These are Rosebery's high school students. They initially attended New Denver's Lakeview Collegiate, getting rides or walking the 4 miles. Teachers Gwen Sutty in the back row center and John Rowe at extreme left, both of New Denver, later started a high school in Rosebery where it's believed this movie was taken. Students here include Jane Kawai, Fumi Kumamoto, Sam Ishihara. This is likely the old schoolhouse in Rosebery where kindergarten and high school were held. Rosebery Kindergarten and Mothers Group. The leader is Miss Ira Lydiard. Likely Wilson Creek and Rosebery. Mrs. Ishiwata, Mrs. Akiyama, Mrs. Kodama, and Mrs. Hayashi, all of New Denver, having a picnic by the creek in Rosebery. Photo taken in 1944. Group photo taken July 31st, 1943, at the first teachers training school held in New Denver. Opening ceremony of the second teachers training school, July 23, 1944. Principal Lord addressing the group. Group photo taken July 23, 1944 at the second teachers training school held in New Denver. The primary teachers circus parade on the closing day of 1944 summer school. The marching band, Martha Yamazaki, Naka Suzuki, Mina Arikado. New Denver Orchard School staff. The ones identified in the front row are Alice Aihoshi, Miss Ohashi, Masako Hamanaka, and Mary Morito. And in the back row are Miss Mizuhara, Chil Shimano, Mini Takagi, Miss Sakai, Mary Nagai, Fumi Okura. High school teachers, Marge Rempo at left and Helen Lawson on the right. Hide Hyodo, supervisor of the relocation camp schools at left, Terry Hidaka, the assistant supervisor, and Mr. Weston at right. Ministers and lay delegates to the Second National Japanese United Church Conference held in New Denver. Ministers are Reverend Kabayama of South Alberta, Reverend McWilliam of Tashme, Reverend Yoshioka of Okanagan, Reverend Shimizu of Kaslo, Reverend Akagawa of Manitoba, Reverend Ogura of Grand Forks, Reverend Komiyama of Lemon Creek, Reverend Bunt of the Home Mission Board. This is Dr. Kozo Shimotakahara of the Kaslo Church. Some of the lay delegates at the conference: front row left to right, Madeline Bach of Greenwood, Grace Namba of Greenwood, May McLaughlin of Tashme. Middle row, Gertrude Hamilton of Lemon Creek, Ira Lydyard of New Denver, not identified, and Nita Sadler of Kaslo. Top row left to right, Gwen Sati of New Denver, Marge Rempel of New Denver, Helen Hurd of Lemon Creek. Closer look at the Japanese ministers. Reverend Jun Kabayama, Reverend Yoshimitsu Akagawa, Reverend Yoshinosuke Yoshioka, Reverend Takashi Komiyama, Reverend Kosaburo Shimizu, Reverend Yutaka Ogura. New Denver United Church Women's Group include Mrs. Okumura, Iwasaki, Tanabe, Nagata, Toyama, Kagetsu, Sugamori, Kodama, Masuda, Mizuno, Aida, Hayashi, Kakuno, Takashima, Okuhara, Takahashi, Sakamoto, and Mrs. Shizuo Akase, who identified the members. The general staff at the CPR Pier, Lily Kurita and Sachi Kodama, are at the left end. Photo of the New Denver orchard where the Japanese lived. Sandon was once the hub of the silver rush, with a reputation as a wide-open town, a heavy producer of silver, lead, and hell. In 1898, there were 2,300 people, perhaps even more, mostly working the numerous mines. Built along the bottom of a gorge, the town suffered from floods, landslides, and fire. With drastic drop in the price of silver, mines closed and Sandon became an abandoned ghost town. Only 50 residents remained before the arrival of 930 Japanese Canadian evacuees in 1942. Reverend Shimizu traveled the Kaslo, Ritolac, Sandon, New Denver route often, by car and by train. From August 1944, when he took over the pastoral care of New Denver and Rosebery, he made the trip every week. This is a once-a-week train that traveled between Kaslo, Sandon, and New Denver. It left Kaslo every Wednesday. On May 17, 1944, he wrote that he started off for New Denver in his car with 2 passengers, but had to turn back after 12 miles because of deep snow. This may be the large mine originally known as the Whitewater Mine, started in 1891 and operated on and off until 1980. Whitewater Creek, 15 miles from Kaslo near Ritolac, on the Kaslo-New Denver Road. Soda Springs, 3 miles from Kaslo, where it is said old-timers used to stop to quench their thirst. The CPR station at Denver Canyon, which served New Denver. In his January 17, 1945 diary entry, Reverend Shimizu described the train from New Denver back to Kaslo via Zinkton and Retalak as, quote, the slowest train I ever rode on. A view of Sandon along the bottom of the gulch. The ghost town of Sandon. Snow and falling rock added to the hazard of traveling the Kaslo-Sandon-New Denver Road. Parts of this road was described as precarious. An old mine at Sandon. Photograph of the Sandon school teachers. Kaslo came into being in 1888 as a site for a sawmill. It boomed in 1893 with the discovery of galena, rich in silver and lead, and of zinc in the Slocan-Kootenai region. Boatloads of men arrived, increasing Kaslo's population that year to 3,000. As the price of silver dropped, however, the town declined and people left. Lumbering continued and a fruit-growing industry developed, with Kaslo's prize-winning cherries becoming famous for its outstanding quality. There were 500 residents in 1941 before the arrival the following year of about 980 Japanese-Canadian evacuees from BC's coastal areas. That's Kaslo on the shore of beautiful Kootenai Lake, as seen from across the bay. The clump of trees at the left, the location of Vimy Park. View of the town. The City Hall. Looking west on B Avenue towards Upper Kaslo. Kaslo High School on top of the hill. East shore of Kaslo at Vimy Park. View of Kootenai Lake. Vimy Park, the ball diamond, the scoreboard. The government building. This is St. Andrew's United Church, where the Japanese congregation met. Sunday school children. Mrs. Chio Umezuki directing traffic. Ruth Ito, Mrs. Shimizu. Rose Fujita, Teiko Arai. Agnes Nagatakia. Naomi Tanaka, Teiko Arai and Michi Kai. That's Ayako Onishi. Sue Matsugu. Mr. Kuba. Ayako Atagi. Amy Yamazaki. Katie Maruyama. Junji Ikeno. Hanako Naruse. Nita Sadler. Harold Maeda. The entire Sunday school. The Issei congregation. Dr. Shimotakahara. Mrs. Shimizu. Mrs. Kai. Mr. Maeda. Mrs. Shimotakahara. Nita Sadler. Mrs. Umezuki. Mrs. Shinobu. Mrs. Yamazaki. Mr. Ohora. Mr. Taira. Mr. Kuba. Younger Mr. Taira. Mr. Yamazaki, Mr. Shinobu, Dr. Shimotakahara. Kindergarten and Mothers Group. That was Ayako Onishi. Mrs. Shimizu. Mrs. Furukawa. Mrs. Shimotakahara, Teiko Arai, Agnes Nagatakia, Nita Sadler, Hanako Naruse. May Day races at Vimy Park. Wedding of Yasuko Yamazaki and Harry Tsuchiya, as well as the Yamazaki and Tsuchiya families. The Shimotakaharas and Shinobus are here. Odori with Kootenai Lake in the background. Mei Yoshikawa on the left and Meni Uno on the right. The old Langham Hotel where many Japanese families lived. Reverend Shimizu's office was located at the leftmost window on the ground floor. That's the west side of the Langham Hotel. Drill Hall, where such events and activities as movies, concerts, school opening ceremonies, and basketball took place. The Roman Catholic Church. Wedding of Hanako Naruse and George Saito. This is at the Naruse house before the wedding. George and Hanako. Mr. and Mrs. Naruse. Mrs. Saito. Dr. Henry Naruse. The wedding ceremony took place in St. Andrew's United Church, with reception following at Dr. and Mrs. Shimotakahara's home. Yamazaki's house in Upper Kaslo. Mr. and Mrs. Heiji Yamazaki. Nisei nurse and a patient in the Kaslo Hospital. This is the hospital. Dorothy Shimizu, Alan P. Alsabrook, artist and a good friend of the Japanese who lived in Shutty Bench, just north of Kaslo. The new Canadian staff in front of the Kootenay Press building, from right to left. Noji Murase, Dr. Banno visiting, Takaichi Umezuki, Casey Oyama, Mark Toyama, Junji Keno, and Harold Maeda. Dorothy Shimizu and neighbor Margie Thompson, whose father was the fish warden. There is the ball diamond at Vimy Park, where some Niseis can be seen playing baseball. Grace Shimizu and Ina Thompson. The Kaslo Clinic, where Dr. Kozo Shimotakahara and Dr. Ed Banno had their offices. Kaslo's 9-hole golf course. It was located at the south end of town, across the creek. Somewhere at this golf course, there was a hill just perfect for kids to whiz down on homemade skis. The smallest post office in Canada at Mirror Lake, a few miles south of Kaslo. Japanese families lived on the second floor above the drugstore at Lift. Kootenay Lake School students. Baker's Dry Goods Store. Kaslo's Main Street. The school was in the Giegrich building, formerly a hardware store. Cherry trees grew not only in the orchards, but in most yards, and they lined many streets. Kaslo was transformed into a wonderland in springtime when the cherry blossoms burst out into full bloom. These are the front yards of the Shimizu and Henkel houses. View from Upper Kaslo. That's the cenotaph at the left, and we're looking down Front Street, lined with cherry trees. The Kootenay building at left. Cherry blossoms on B Avenue. And on D Avenue. The Caslow Creek. View of Caslow from the golf course. In the foreground by the creek is part of Caslow Dairy. The steeple of St. Andrew's United Church. This is the town of Caslow as seen from the high school located up the hill. No houses were built specially for the Japanese in Caslow. All families were accommodated in existing vacant buildings and houses, many in the old Caslow Hotel. St. Andrew's United Church, where the local congregation welcomed the Japanese congregation to share the use of its facilities. The Issei congregation, photo taken in 1944. Beginner's Sunday School class. Teachers in the back row are Kazuko Ohashi at the left end and Hanako Naruse at center. Primary and beginners class. The teachers from left to right are Mariko Ueda, Molly Fujita, Sumi Sasaki, Mrs. Taira, Mrs. Ohora, Kazuko Shinobu, and Sachi Shimotakahara. Juniors and intermediate girls, Reverend Shimizu and Harold Maeda at the very back. Senior girls from left to right, Sherry Kitagawa, Nellie Obana, not identified, Miss Amy Yamazaki, Minnie Takahashi, Reiko Taira, Betty Kai, and Nellie Segura. Senior boys, Goro Maruyama, Roy Ohora, Ted Shimizu, Billy Umezuki, Gordon Kai, Bob Umezuki, Sugar Ito, Red Kitagawa, Art Ito, Ken Matsugu, Yoi Segura, Ken Maruyama, Victor Shimizu, Dick Arai, Gordon Nagatakia, Paul Maruyama, and Mr. Kuba. Beginners, primary and junior teachers, left to right, Teiko Arai, Ruth Ito, Mrs. Umezuki, Toyo Taira, Michi Kai, Naomi Tanaka, Agnes Nagatakia, Rose Fujita, Mrs. Mizue Shimizu, and Amy Yamamoto. Intermediate and seniors teachers, left to right, front row, Su Matsugu, Ayako Atagi, Amy Yamazaki, Katie Maruyama. Back row, left to right, Harold Maeda, Mr. Mitsunobu Kuba, Nita Sadler, Junji Ikeno, and Ayako Onishi. The Young People's Union, photo taken March 1944. Nita Sadler, Aya Sato, Betty Yamamoto, Ayako Atagi, Teiko Arai, Katie Maruyama, Esther Nagatakia, Sue Matsugu, Nara Maruyama, Michi Kai, Naomi Tanaka, Agnes Nagatakia, Sachi Suzuki, Toyo Matsuzaki, Toyo Taira, Reverend Shimizu, Junji Keno, Ken Kutsukake, Tom Shoyama, Noji Murase, and Mr. Hidaka. Young People's Beach Party. The leader is Miss Sadie Tate, standing at the back center. The Nisei Choir. Kazuko Ohashi, Mei Yamazaki, Hanako Naruse, Lily Ueda, Sumi Sasaki, Yasuko Yamazaki, Teiko Arai, Kazuko Hidaka, Molly Fujita, Ayako Atagi, Mary Yamada, Aiko Murakami, Eiko Kutsukake, Mariko Ueda, Carl Suzuki, Vernon Shimotakahara, Amy Yamazaki, Roy Ito, Mr. McPhee, Roy Shinobu, and Reverend Shimizu. Ministers and lay delegates at the first wartime National Japanese United Church Conference held in Kaslo, September 1943. Those that were not present in the photo of the 1944 conference in New Denver include Reverend Kyuichi Nomoto of New Denver, Reverend Armitage of Kaslo's St. Andrew's United Church, and Reverend Hugh Ray of Vancouver, President of the BC Conference. Building at the left is Kootenay Lake School, which was set up for the Japanese Nisei Elementary School children. The Kootenay Lake School teachers shown here are, from left to right, Mariko Ueda, Hideko Hidaka, Molly Fujita, the third principal, Aya Sato, Lily Ueda, Betty Shinohara, Nabi Toda, Sue Matsugu, Naka Suzuki, and Roy Shinobu, the second principal. Here's a closer look at some of the teachers. From left to right, Ayako Atagi, who was the fifth and last principal of Kootenay Lake School, Kazuko Shinobu, and Martha Yamazaki. Sue Matsugu, also a teacher at Kootenay Lake School. Hideko Hidaka's grade 3 class. Lily Ueda's grade 6 class. That's Lily Ueda at the extreme right. Betty Shinohara's grade 7 class. Betty Shinohara is standing at the extreme right. Mariko Ueda's grade 8 class. the Kaslo High School, which the Nisei students were eventually able to attend. Some of the men used to go matsutake mushroom hunting up the mountain. Dorothy Shimizu is standing beside some good-sized ones brought back by a family friend. From left to right, Tom Shoyama, Noji Murase, Sam Kai, and Sam Matsuba as they appeared in the 1943 variety concert. The main street of Kaslo, lined with shops. Japanese families lived upstairs in some of these buildings.